Hello, I'm Matt Whitman, and this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. I have a reporter friend, and he told me that if I changed my pitch and inflection more, it would make me more interesting. I'd like to think it worked. This is the second half of an episode on Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, which is a sad passage about James, the brother of John, being executed by King Herod, and about Peter being arrested with intention of having the same thing done to him. I covered most of the raw details of the passage in the last one, and I'm going to cover more of the big observations about what all of this means in this one. Here we go. Now look, for the sake of the rest of this video, I'm not even going to bother trying to pretend that Peter doesn't get let out of jail miraculously. That's what's coming. Sorry, spoiled it. That might not be as much fun, but this is all going to make more sense if we just know that's what's happening next. Because what we're seeing here is Luke using a literary technique that I love in storytelling. It's a feint. He's giving us the impression that we're about to see the same thing happen to a very important character that we've seen happen to an important character, but not the big guy himself. And it looks like this is an impossible situation. In screenwriting, sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the all hope is lost moment. It's that place where it doesn't matter how you slice it, there's just nobody left to come and bail out the main character. There is no reason for hope, and surely his fate is sealed. God is stacking the odds against himself, as we've seen him do so many times throughout the Bible, so that only he can get credit when he chooses to deliver Peter. And he is going to deliver Peter. And let's be honest, that raises a question about the character and work of God if we're to be truthful with ourselves. See, this concludes by saying that everybody was earnestly praying for Peter. Surely we're not to believe that no one bothered to pray for James. Like, well, he's one of those guys that wears the red outfits on the away team, so he just had to die to help us understand the tension. We're not going to really waste prayers on him. They loved this guy. He was one of the original core members of this whole movement. Of course everybody was praying for him. So why would God let him get the sword and let Peter off the hook? Did the people of the church just not pray hard enough for James? Did they not mean it enough? Did they have some unconfessed sin? Maybe went to some websites they shouldn't have gone to, so God didn't answer their prayers? If you listen to the way a lot of people think about God and the Bible and prayer today, those are the only conclusions you could come to. But I think so often it's easy for us to focus on ourselves and our role in prayer, and to think that the magic power we get out of prayer has to do with our plans and how well we're behaving or how well we turn a phrase when we petition God. But that's just not the way I see it working out in the Bible at all. What I see in the Bible is God has an agenda. People pray to align themselves to that agenda. And sometimes God answers affirmatively to their prayers, and sometimes he doesn't. And that's his business, because his plan is bigger than our perception of how things ought to unfold. Yep, this is a crap deal for James if there's no afterlife and there's no Jesus and there's no God and there's no heaven. But James knew what he was signing up for. And if James didn't want to die, that option was completely in front of him at this moment. All James had to do was say, I renounce the whole thing. It was a great big lie. Jesus never came back from the dead. That's something we made up to just pull off an elaborate prank, and it got out of hand, and now we're just running with it because chicks dig it. I'm sorry, we're embarrassed. Everybody else will tell you the truth too, but I'm not dying for this thing. You know how much more useful that would have been to Herod and the religious leaders than just killing a guy who went to his grave swearing it's all true? All he had to do was just say that, and the whole thing would have been over for him. But he was certain, and he'd seen it with his own eyes, and he'd experienced the thing with absolute certainty, and so he wasn't going to back down. He had counted the cost, just like Jesus told him to. He did the math, and the math pointed to, it'd probably be better just to take this sword right now. To me, it's very interesting to speculate about what Peter was thinking here, what James was thinking here, what the church was thinking here, what God was going for here. And that's all fun, and I think it's worth our time. But here's the bottom line for this whole passage for me. Jesus said, count the cost, because following him might be costly. James knew that was the deal, and it proved to be costly. Peter knew that was the deal, and this time it proved to only be sort of costly, but a couple instances down the road, he ended up dying for this thing too. Probably I will not die for following Jesus. Probably, if you're a believer, you won't either. But there are people who are suffering that kind of a fate for following Jesus, even in the world today. And whether that's something we think might be a reality for us someday or not, the call is the same. Count the cost of following Jesus. Is it worth it? My point is, Jesus told everybody on the front side of following him to think about whether or not it was worth it and whether or not they might be willing to give up what they have to give up for this greater thing that is following Jesus. And I don't think that's changed. I think even now, even in the very free, comfortable Western society in which I live, this is still a question that should be asked on the front side of following Jesus. And even for people who continue to follow Jesus and have made that choice a long time ago, I still think it's a question that we need to ask ourselves again and again as we continue to choose to follow Jesus with our lives. Last thought, following Jesus could be costly. Clearly, these guys understood that it was absolutely worth it. And clearly, Luke is making the point through the way he tells this story that they were absolutely right. This is serious, weighty content that each of us needs to consider deeply for ourselves. So what better way to wrap up an episode like that than with hilarious outtakes? I'm Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. And I just...
Major creep factor.